Well, I'm excited. Really great opportunity today to sit down with not only a really sharp mind in the real estate space, but one of my good friends, Noah Blanton. Noah with WFG Title. Why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself, Mr. Blanton?
I'll read the bio my mother wrote.
That's always a good one.
Yeah. So I run the direct operations for WFG in Oregon. I have about 25 years of transactional real estate, and a lot of the conversation that we're going to talk about today comes from our desire to kind of predict and control the market and our look into our business. And of course, we're a velocity-based transaction type of business, so it matters a lot to us. I have a master's in real estate finance and enjoy long walks on the beach and have a golden retriever. No, I don't have any of those things. But
you work for a guy named Pat who's kind of a data wonk, and he's been a guy who's spoken a lot at economic presentations, and it's no shock to me, the law of attraction, that you ended up working at an organization like that, because you kind of find a lot of fascination and interest in the data too.
Yeah, Pat Stone, the founder of our company, and we have a good time together. Sometimes we co-present, and sometimes we disagree, and that's the best.
That's the good part. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. I was recently at a conference in Vegas with Ken Perry called Momentum Builders. It was a fantastic conference. And there were a lot of perspectives being shared. And of course, we're going to talk specifically about the economy, where we're at, and the things that we're seeing, the persistence that we're seeing today of some challenges to the economy, and the resistance for mortgage interest rates to dip back down to where everyone in the mortgage businesses wish they would be, so that they can originate more loans and candidly, in many cases, help more people get into homes more affordably. But what we want to talk about today, Noah, is the agnostic nature of data. And sometimes the data is used to make people feel better or be more optimistic, or to sell products and services, or to give people this sense that good news is just around the corner. It's 30 days away and rates will be 5.5% again, and we're going to crush it this summer. And you know what? I suppose that could happen.
That'd be great.
But the truth is the data is agnostic, yes?
Yes, that's true. And it's interesting because whenever I listen to interest rate predictions, it's funny. Go to a lot of conferences, listen to a lot of people. They give an interest rate prediction, and this isn't true for everybody, but they'll give their prediction, and no one predicted 8%. That was not in the wheelhouse of what people predicted. And I think typically we have a bias towards predicting something we're comfortable with and that we think will work. And when we would have a conversation about 8%, it was so unthinkable that we just wouldn't go there and predict it. And yet, briefly, that is where we went.
Right.
And I think this cycle and the last cycle, have to inform our thinking around really trying to divorce the emotion and our desire for what we want from what the data is trying to tell us. And I think the reverse is true as well, by the way. When we went to 2.5%, no one really predicted that as well. We tend to cluster into this band that we're comfortable with and we know we can operate at. 3.5% is amazing. 6.5% is fine. As long as we stick in there, everything's okay.
We've created a normal by which people can accept things.
Yeah.
And outside of those deviations, we're either an extreme boom or extreme bust.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I want to talk today about the agnostic nature of data is that data is often used for purposes that are defined, purposes that are intentional. And of course, there's an inherent danger in that, in utilizing data to either create or support an outcome that you hope for, as opposed to studying data. And I want to talk a little bit about the nature of echo chambers and what happens in the echo chamber with respect to, in particular, economic data.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of self-evident. Depending on what you want to hear, you can find the data to support it often. I also think that we suffer a little bit from, there is a lot of data. I mean, data that is readily available, connecting that data together, knowing how it interacts with each other, that is difficult. And so sometimes it's easier to go with our gut. This is what I think is going to happen. This is what I'm comfortable with happening, and we'll zero in on that. And it's interesting because, if you're talking about consumer dynamics, oftentimes what the consumer expects actually is what happens. So maybe in some cases that isn't necessarily a bad thing. consumer expectations for inflation generally tend to lead where inflation goes, funny enough. So maybe there isn't anything inherently wrong with that. I just think we have to be very careful about following the data to its natural conclusion, not where we want to go. And I also think we need to be careful about noticing things that are different or things that are not the same as the last cycle. And so, I mean, as a for instance, we've never had fixed rate mortgages below 3%. That's not been a scenario that we've had the pleasure of going through in the last 50 years. What does that mean going forward? We've not ever, had a global pandemic in the modern era. What does that mean long term? We've not ever had $34 trillion in debt. What does that mean? We've not ever run budget deficits as large as they are. What does that mean? And so I think we're forced to look backwards to interpret forwards, but I think we have to incorporate some of those things and acknowledge this is different than any scenario in the past, and what is its influence going forward?
Well, anybody watching this it's a good probability that they're in the mortgage business, and everybody in the mortgage business is familiar with and comfortable with the idea of layered risk, right?
Yep.
Mortgage lenders are famous for pricing themselves in ways to manage risk, and layers of risk determine the pricing. It's fascinating. You ripped off several different things that we've never experienced before in the history of the country, and now, or in the last years, we've experienced all of them.
Yeah.
And I think you have to apply a little bit of the layers of risk concept to the idea that not only have we never experienced these in history, we're experiencing them all now, or at least concurrently within a short time frame. Let's take a piece of data. Let's talk about delinquency rates for the sake of this conversation, to keep it short and to keep it containable. Let's talk about delinquency rates and what we can learn looking at the historical relevance between the delinquency rates we're seeing today and what we've seen in past markets.
Yeah. And I also think we need to recognize there's a short and a long-term impact. The short-term impact of the cycle we just went through has already been felt. And I think we're now in the long-term impact. Let's take that to your point about the last cycle. We'll connect it to the last cycle. So 5, 6, 7, 8 leading up to 2008. And kind of what that means in the short term and the long term. In the short term, we ran up a delinquency rate, I think, of 10 or 11% of all single-family residential mortgages went into delinquency during that period of time. On a year-over-year basis, we had 10%, 10%, 10%. What that produced in the short term, rapidly falling prices, lots of foreclosures. That was the short-term impact. 6 million foreclosures in that period of time. The impact on inventory meant prices came down. And the long-term impact of that, though, was underbuilding for 15 years. So you had the short-term effect and the long-term effect. The long-term effect is now impacting the short-term effect of this cycle. And so I think we have to have a very long-term view of what has changed and what hasn't. The last cycle meant we underbuilt for 15 years, and now we're experiencing the short-term impact of that. Today, I think it's almost a quarter of all mortgages have a fixed rate below 3%. The important part about that number, it means nothing, I think, in isolation. It does mean something if you say pre-pandemic, it was some number closer to 2 or 3%, had a fixed rate below 3%. What's the short and the long-term impact of that? The short-term impact is we have very low inventory, and contrary to a lot of thinking, we have firm pricing, or firmer pricing than we might have otherwise expected, low transaction velocity. I said to somebody the other day, I feel like this market is pick one of two, stable pricing or transaction velocity, but you don't get to pick both in this market. So we should be looking at, I think, the whiplash effect of, we wrote, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of variable rate loans. We all kind of understand in retrospect what happened. What was very obvious, by the way, if we were really looking at it. I would suggest that same sort of predictability exists in this market if we just look for it. There is a cause and effect to 0.5% treasuries and then 4.5% treasuries. There is a cause and effect to fixed rate mortgages below 3%, where now 60% of all mortgages have a rate below, I think it's 4.5%. There is an impact to that. There's a whiplash effect, if you will, or a cause and effect. And I think we should be looking for that in this market. If we were looking for it in the last market, we would have seen it. Many people did. The more important point about that is many people saw it in the last market. Few people wanted to listen. And this is not a doom and gloom type of conversation. It is let's just be realistic so we can plan for the market that is coming and the impact that this cycle is going to have on the next, and I really think it'll be, 5 to 10 years.
It could have legs. And I think that's so important what you just said, is that it's back to the original way we opened this conversation, the agnostic nature of data.
Yep.
You don't have to like it. You shouldn't dislike it. It's just data. The challenge for people is to parse the data, to research and study the data, and then to parse it in ways that are relevant and consistent with the data as it presents itself. But like you just did, you went back and gave historical context to 2007-8, where if we wanted to see, we had all the data we needed to know that we were heading towards a precipice.
Yeah.
And we ended up at one. Look, this is a conversation that could go on for a great deal longer time, and it might just do that. We might have to have you come back in the studio and spend some more time talking about this. But I think our encouragement today is, look, you can't all be economists, and not all of us have the natural affinity for economic data like Noah does and other people, Pat Stone and others like that. But you don't have to. There's plenty of resources out there. Just avoid the echo chamber. Avoid going to a place to get your information that just simply reinforces a bias that you already have. Try to resist that temptation and try to look at the data as just data and then make intelligent decisions so that you can guide your steps moving forward. Noah, I want to thank you for being here. It's always fun.
Good to be here.
It's always fun having friends in the studio. I've known Noah for the better part of 25 years?
Yeah.
I think you were a teenager.
Right after I was born.
Well,
yeah.
You were, yeah, exactly. Nice try. I am the old one in the room, but you're still a little bit older than that. We look forward to having you back, and thank you.
I'd love to come back.